If you have a Bible, and it's helpful to you to follow along, please turn in it to Luke chapter 8. This is where we're going to be spending this morning. And we're going to spend our morning on one of the favorite texts for anybody who preaches anytime, anywhere. It's been preached on. I can't imagine how many times this text has been used as a sermon or a Sunday school class. And it has some things to teach us. But I want to say some of those things might not be quite what we expect. Let's take a look at the text. I'll begin reading in verse 22 of Luke chapter 8. One day when Jesus was with his disciples, he said, "Let's go over to the other side of the lake." So they got into a boat and they set out. As they sailed, Jesus fell asleep. A squall came down. Maybe somebody in the boat was preaching. I don't know. That could have been what happened. Jesus... Maybe Peter was preaching and Jesus dozed off. A squall came down on the lake so that the boat was being swamped and they were in great danger. And the disciples woke Jesus and said to him, "Master, we're going to drown." Jesus got up and rebuked the wind and the raging waters. The storm subsided and all was calm. And Jesus said, "Where is your faith?" In fear and amazement they asked one another, "Who is this that even he commands the winds and the water, and they obey him?" Now, Jesus did a lot of extraordinary stuff that the disciples had the privilege to watch. But this one, I'm going to say, is for them more spectacular than anything they've seen him do up to this point because of their reaction to it. They're afraid of it. Just imagine. Let's say we were here and you were standing in front of your home and a tornado were bearing down on your house, and Jesus was hanging out at your house and he walked out and just said, "Be gone," and the tornado went away. That I think we would remember that, probably. Well, this condition on the lake that day, and this, by the way, this is Lake Galilee, Tiberias, Gennesaret, and Chinnereth. All those four titles apply to the one body of water. It's Lake Galilee. It's up in the northern part of Israel, fed by the Jordan River as it comes down out of the mountains. It's 600 feet below sea level. That's pretty far. And outside of it are all of these tablelands. And leading down to it are all of these valleys and mountains. It's really rugged. If you ever get a relief map of Israel, take a look at the land around Lake Galilee and you'll see what I'm talking about. Well, 600 feet is a long way. I don't know if you know about meteorological conditions. There's something called orographic lifting. What that means is the air gets pushed up by the land. That's all it means. And the air that comes down to Lake Galilee is cold and dry because of the elevation around. Well, Lake Galilee is moist and warm. And when the conditions are right, especially around November, now I don't know what time of year this is, but any time, but especially around November, when those winds come down onto that warm body of water, these storms come up and they are extremely violent. This is a very common condition that occurs on Lake Galilee. Now, here they are, they set off, there's no storm, now there's a storm, and you have to remember this is at night. We're so used to lights in this world, aren't we? We don't know what it is to be really in the dark. In the modern world, we don't. This is dark. There are no electric lights. There are no street lamps from the city. This is so dark that I wonder in a storm, once the moon and the stars are covered up with clouds, if you can see your hand. I don't know. So there they are, in the middle of a storm, in the dark, and Jesus is asleep. Now that's made a lot of in a lot of sermons, a lot of Sunday school classes. Look how calm Jesus is while the storm rages, he's asleep. I don't think it's a big deal that Jesus is asleep. And I'll tell you why. If you read the texts prior, he's been a busy guy. And here's a chance. These fishermen, they typically fish at night. So for them, this might as well be the middle of the day. For Jesus, it's nighttime. And he's asleep. This text that speaks to Jesus sleeping here in Mark chapter 4, you find the same text. But Mark makes a detail. He gives us a detail of Jesus sleeping, says he's asleep on the cushion. Now, for 100 years, people argued that this text was obviously some kind of legend because boats didn't have cushions in the first century. That's exactly the argument. Why would they put this dumb detail in here about a cushion? Well, we didn't know till 1986. 1986, Lake Galilee, there was a drought, and it shrank to the lowest levels in living memory. And guess what was uncovered on the shoreline that used to be underwater? A boat. They dug it up. They call it now, it's in the museum in Israel, it's called the Jesus boat. Now, I don't think it's the boat they were in, but it's one of those boats. Then they dug up a mosaic that had a picture of one of these boats on it. They dated them to within 100 BC to 50 AD, right there in the time period when Jesus was around. These boats were like almost like a leaf. If you rolled the ends of a leaf up, that's how they were shaped. And they could be rowed or they could be sailed. They had a mast. The mast was anchored at the bottom, and then there was this deck in the middle of the boat where the mast passed through that was anchored there also. They were square sail masted. You know what that is? That means your sail comes up perpendicular to the boat, so the wind has to pretty well be behind you for you to sail forward. That's deck where the mast comes up. These boats, how many of you have ever seen a modern sailboat? I'm sure everybody has. I mean, pictures of them at least. What is it that keeps the boat from tipping over when the wind comes at it from the side, a sailboat? You don't know? Underneath the sailboat, there's what? A keel, right. There's the big flat member, like a big fin underneath the sailboat. That thing is there just to resist the wind. These boats didn't have keels. Underneath that deck, they had a big sack of sand or rocks or grain. And they put it under there to provide the ballast for the boat so that it wouldn't tip over. And when Mark says Jesus was asleep on the cushion, that's what he's sleeping on. We didn't know that till we found the picture and found the boat. So that argument went away. But that's where he is. And so the controversy about the cushion disappeared. Now, all of this, I'm saying this to say, beyond the fact that I think the history is pretty interesting, there's an internal component for we who call ourselves disciples of Jesus. I know you all know this, but it's something that I think is good to be reminded of. There's an internal component. I want to read a couple of texts to you. You don't have to look them up. One of them is found in Ephesians chapter 6. The other one's found in John chapter 7. The text in Ephesians, Paul says, "Servants, be obedient to those who are according to the flesh, your masters, with fear and trembling, in singleness of heart as to obedience to Jesus. Not in the way of service only so that people can see you as people pleasers, but as servants of Christ doing the will of God from your heart. With good will doing service as to the Lord, not as unto people." And then Jesus says this, "My teaching is not mine, but the one who sent me. If anybody desires to do God's will, they will know of the teaching, whether it is from God or I'm speaking of myself." Now, what I'm getting at here is, and it'll show up in the sermon as we go, a commitment to God is a mutual commitment. I don't know if you think about it that way, but it's a good way to think about it. We commit ourselves to God through Jesus, what he did on the cross for us. But then God commits himself to us as well. There's a mutual exchange of commitment. And with that in mind, all of that in mind, everything that Jesus said and did has some kind of significance. You remember what John said? He said if everything Jesus said and did were recorded, all the books of the world couldn't hold it. So he did a lot of stuff we don't have. But that tells me something about what we do have. All of it means something. It's not just something there for us to read. It's there for a purpose. So when Jesus said things and did things, the things we have recorded, they all mean something very important that we're supposed to learn from something from. Well, what is it we learn from this text? You and I are in this room today, and we all say that we have faith in Jesus, right? We all do. That faith only operates for other people to see in one place. Only one place. That's when it's tested by some means. We're in here. We all accept each other as believing people, but when we leave this place, there are lots of people who know us. They can't see anything of us in the fact that we know Jesus, except that somehow we become tested in our faith, and they see that. They see it. Well, where's the most common place of testing for any of us? Our home. That's where we get tested most often, and I would say the most severely as well. Maybe at work. If you've got a job and you're working around other people, that would be a place of testing as well. Well, the reason I say that is we are tested in the places that are closest to us in the way in which we live. Where are the disciples right now? They're in a boat on the water. What do they do for a living? They fish. So this is nothing to them. It's nothing for them to be on the lake at night and a storm to come up. So this must have been a really bad storm. This must have been so bad that they thought we're going to drown. They are being tested in the place that is most familiar to them, closest to them. That's where the test is taking place for them. I want to read something to you. When I say we're tested in our home, I don't think we capture really just how critical and important that is. We are tested in our home, and there's a reason for it. John Lennon, everybody knows who John Lennon is or was. He had a son. He and Yoko Ono had a son named Julian. Julian's still with us. And Julian was being interviewed, and the interrogator said, "Julian, what was John Lennon like as a dad at home?" Because, I mean, if you look at John Lennon as a person represented by his music, by his politics, you would say, well, this is obviously a peace-loving, caring individual. Julian said this, "My dad was a hypocrite. Dad could talk about peace and love and write songs about it to the world, but he could never show it to the people who were supposedly the most important to him, his wife and his son. How can you talk about peace and love and have a family in bits and pieces, no communication, adultery, and divorce? You can't if you're true and honest within yourself." See, testing, when we're tested, it looks really normal. It doesn't look like I don't even know how to describe it in a way that it would look like maybe what we expect in our minds when a test comes. Maybe if you hear enough preaching and read enough Bible, maybe you think demons are going to swirl around, or there's going to be somebody coming in who's ugly and smells like sulfur and is going to test us, or that somebody's going to come up to us and offer us $1 million if we'll say that we don't believe in Jesus. Those kinds. That isn't how it goes. Testing comes in the places where we just normally live and are most familiar when we're not expecting it at all. That's what makes it a test. We're not ready for it. We're not ready for it. There was a youth pastor who, big churches, we don't have that here. We couldn't have a lock-in because it'd be all of us. And I'm too old to do lock-ins. I just, staying up all night playing ping pong is not my thing. Maybe it's yours. I don't know. You may be really into that sort of thing. But this youth pastor in a large church where they have 30 or 40 kids was having a lock-in. Everybody from 9th grade to high school locked in with the youth pastor. I don't even know why that's fun, personally. I look at that and I say, okay, if you feel like that's what you need to do, but it doesn't sound fun to me. It's like camping. I don't see how that's fun. Right. I mean, I like a hot shower. I don't know about the rest of you. I smell bad when I don't have a hot shower. But Here they are at the lock-in. The youth pastor and one of the interns are playing ping pong. And there's this little girl who, every time the ball comes near her, she takes the ball and runs off with it. Now, I've played ping pong before. I think personally I would find that rather irritating. I don't think I would enjoy that game very long. The first couple of times, oh, that's nice. You took the ball, bring the ball back. After about 6 or 7, I'm not going to be so happy to see the ball go away. This youth pastor said earlier in the day, just as a happenstance occurrence, just like Winston played a song where they talked about Jesus out on the water in the boat, which I didn't know anything about. Here's the text. He remembered he had been reading in Paul's letter to the church at Corinth. Love is patient, love is kind, love is long-suffering, love doesn't seek its own. So when the little girl took the ball, he just stayed calm, and they were kind to her, and they waited for her to bring the ball back. They never lashed out at this little girl. Well, if you have been to church camp events like this, let me tell you how they go. I did a bunch of them. This is how they work. They're like a Mooney camp. Now, you don't know what that is. They keep you awake as long as possible so that when the altar call comes on Sunday morning, you're so tired that maybe you'll just agree to become a believer because you're so sleepy you don't know what else to do. That's how they go. That's just how they're done. Well, Sunday morning they gave the altar call, and this little girl came forward to become a believer. And they asked her why she was coming forward, and she said, last night, she said, you didn't get mad at me when I took the ball. She said, I was raised in a home that we've never gone to church. My friends brought me here. In my family, the way I get attention is by making people mad. We've known children like that. She said, you never got mad at me. You never were angry with me. And she said, I saw something in you that I wanted to have in me. And so she became a believer. See, they were being tested. And there was a reason for their test. It wasn't just so that they could grow. It was because somebody was watching as they were being tested. You better believe that in our homes, when we get tested, even if it's just the person with whom we are being tested in the moment, they are watching. They are watching. Jesus told these guys, look at the text, we're going to the other shore. That should have been good enough for them. That's why Jesus' surprising question, where's your faith? You see, he told them what they were going to do. That should have settled the issue, storm or not. But we're not like that at all. We've got this whole book. And yet when we're tested, we question what's going on. We do. Jesus was going to teach them a lesson because he's a giver. God is a giver. He is pure giving. When Becky and I had our son, she had it. I didn't do that. Becky did that. She had the child. After he was born, she had postpartum. And that's a bad thing. And I remember after a couple of weeks, some friends of mine at church who everybody knew what was going on. I mean, they knew that, this was going on. They said, Rip, call Becky and tell her that we're struggling, we want to take you out for lunch. So I called Becky's mom and told her, I'll be a little later coming home. These people want to take me out to lunch. They wanted to do that for me because they saw that, we were going through a lot. So went out to lunch. When I got to lunch, I didn't feel very good because I'd been staying up with a baby all during the week. I was worried about Becky, concerned about our future. I was not a person that really was interested in laughing and talking and yucking it up. Next day, one of the people that took me out to lunch came to me and said, Rip, you were incredibly rude yesterday. I said, really? What are you talking about? We're sitting there at lunch, you didn't even talk to us. We were trying to do something nice for you. I looked at him and I said, don't ever do anything nice for me again. Don't do nice things for me again if it's expected of me that I owe you something afterward. That is so different from God. You know, Jesus asks them this question, where's your faith? That's not a question to make them feel bad. That's not there to hurt them or to cause them pain for the fact that they were afraid while they were in the boat. We're all afraid. All of us in this room. You see, God's givingness will never fail. In the Army Rangers, they have a saying. It's called sua sponte. You know what that means? If an Army Ranger comes and saves another soldier's life, and in the process of saving this soldier, that Army Ranger is injured, this Army Ranger says, why did you do that? The Army Ranger who risked their life will say, sua sponte, I chose it. I chose it. That's what God has done for us. That's what Jesus did. He chose this. He chose it because God is a giver. It makes everything we do in responding to the testing that comes, at least in my mind, a whole different picture than just something hard we have to go through. It's God and His givingness giving us an opportunity to be somebody we were not before we were tested. And we get a lifetime to do that. A lifetime. I don't know where everybody is today, but if I've said anything about which you've got a question, you want to pray with me, talk with me about this church, I'll stay as long as it takes as we close.